I'm a former visa officer, and I want to tell you about one of the cases where I was able to help one of my clients get their visa issued. It was a couple, an American and a Chinese couple. They'd been separated during the pandemic. They'd had their first visa interview for a fiancé visa, and for no good reason, the visa officers refused the fiancé's visa in China. To my understanding and my analysis, they had a relationship that was bona fide, that was established, and they had plenty of evidence to go into their interview and convince the visa officer that they had a real relationship, that they intended to get married in the US. But they weren't prepared. They went into their interview and they didn't have a plethora of evidence ready to present to the visa officer to dispel any doubts that they might have. And really, you kind of have to compare your evidence to the evidence that everyone else is going to bring into the interview. If you bring what you think is plenty, 10 photographs, but everyone else is bringing in 100 photographs, it looks like you have less evidence and therefore a weaker relationship. They went in, they were refused. Unfortunately, it was during the pandemic. She couldn't travel to the US, he couldn't travel into China. They had to reside in multiple countries without overstaying their visas throughout the pandemic when it was very hard to travel in order to be together, in order to continue their relationship. So they were jumping around the Middle East and Southeast Asia just to be able to stay together. I started working with them at this point. They submitted a new visa petition for a marriage that their lawyer helped them submit, but they still had an interview coming up in China. And at that interview, they were going to have to convince the same cohort of visa officers that had refused his wife's visa that their relationship was bona fide. Okay, now think about this. In that office, somebody, one of their colleagues, had just made the decision that that relationship was not legitimate. Now our challenge is that they need to go into the interview and convince those same visa officers, that same cohort of officers that work together every day, that trust each other, that that visa and that relationship is legitimate. That's not an easy task. What happens is that visa officers oftentimes will rely on the decisions that their colleagues have made in the past. Not everyone, but most visa officers will take that information and rely on it very heavily. It's strong evidence that someone with the exact same credentials, the exact same training as you has made this decision. There are other officers that are more bold, more confident, and willing to make a decision counter to their colleagues' decisions. But in general, you really have to present a strong case to show a visa officer why they should make a decision different from their colleague. To make a visa officer say, actually, you know what? My colleague was wrong, and I'm going to change their decision to give the visa to this visa applicant. So working with me over multiple sessions, we prepared his wife, who wasn't a super confident, extroverted speaker, to be prepared to get all their evidence ready so that then when they went into their visa interview, she was able to convince the visa officer to issue that visa. I was ecstatic. It was great. After all these months of waiting on their part, where they didn't know if they were going to get their visa issued, they'd already had a horrible experience the first time, they were able to go in and confidently get their visa issued this time. That's why I love this job. That's why I love doing what I'm doing. If you want to work with us to help you get your visa issued, click the link in the caption, set up a meeting with a former consular officer that's worked in your country, that speaks your language, that's an expert in your visa type, and get your visa issued.